Well, happy February. Let's see what date is it? 20th. I am trying out some contacts and I am finding out what I can see and what I can't see. But I have my backup glasses over here on the side and I want to welcome you. What is the weather like going on in your part of town? It is, yeah, I wouldn't say it's a blizzard. But it's starting to look pretty snowy, and I'm supposed to drive to the state finals of the high school swim meet today, and I might not get out in time. So we're going to go ahead and have this session. Welcome to everyone who has joined in. Hello to June from New Hampshire. And we have some people who've already commented on the question of the day. Did you have a female ancestor who graduated from college before 1960? Tell me her name and what you know about her. So that is what our topic of today is: female college students. And did you know, here's a funny tidbit, you can let me know in the comment. Did you know co-ed only applied to females for the longest time? So women who went to college were called the co-eds. I just thought co-ed meant co-educational, meaning both genders were going to college at the same time. So when I was preparing, looking for what do you call a female college student, and the word is co-ed. So that learn something new every day. I want to make sure that the sound's coming in. The chat is kind of stalled a little bit, and I was afraid that maybe I went live and I'm talking to no one and nobody can hear me. So if you can hear me okay, just put a Y in the chat as well. As soon as I see some Ys, we'll get started. Thank you for all of you who are coming in, joining into the session. I like to do genealogy topics in the live streams that can get some engagement and talk about things that need to be debunked or clarified in genealogy research. So I want to be sure that all is well. Okay. All right. So just wait, doing a quick sound check with everybody. I see that 16 of you have joined in already. So as soon as I see some Ys or some thumbs up, all right, got some Ys. Okay, we're good to go. Good to go. All right. And maybe there's just a little bit of lag in broadcasting. So that's why there was a little bit of a delay. So thank you for everyone who told me that the sound is coming in. So let's go ahead and get started. One more minute, maybe. Snow hasn't started yet, projected 3 to 6 inches in New Hampshire. Okay, yeah. I'm not going to complain about the light dusting because honestly, what's great about living in New Mexico, it may fall, but it doesn't really stick around very long. So that's kind of fun. All right. So we're in a nice, warm false spring. So it's nice out. So false spring, does that mean what I like to call the teaser or the fight between winter and spring, where it's cold, and then all of a sudden you get these random warm days and it feels like, oh, this is so nice. And then it goes back to cold. Is that what a false spring's in? Let me know, Stacy. I'd love to hear from that. Okay, so without further delay, thank you all for joining me on this session. I want to hear your thoughts. I want to see your comments about the topic of women getting educated before 1960. So let me take you down how this topic came to be, a little story time. So I was doing a 4-generation project for families that connected through Utah. I don't actually have relatives from Utah, but I like to challenge myself and see, test my skills. So I picked a family that had passed through Utah for 4 generations. While researching a woman in that lineage, I discovered that she attended the University of Deseret. Now, if you know what Deseret is, great. If not, Deseret was the name for the Latter-day Saints that went out west before they were told they had to change the name to Utah. And bonus points for anybody who knows what the definition or the meaning of Deseret is, as well as Ute, because I believe they have similar names. And of course, I can't remember when I go live. So, not knowing what the University of Deseret was, I did some research and I found this fascinating history from the University of Utah. The University of Deseret became the University of Utah, and it talks about how the first classes were held in November 1850. Mind you, the pioneers that crossed the plains, if I remember correctly, arrived in June of 1847. So a university is being started 3 years later. That tells me that this group of people have a high value on education. So not only did the first classes start, and it was small, which makes sense because they're just now settling the desert. 25 males were in that first class. But women were admitted in the second term, making this the university one of the first schools in the West to do so. And then in 1892, around statehood, is when the name changed. So having seen that information and realizing one of the women I was researching in this project attended the University of Deseret so early in history, I thought, wait, I remember hearing that women didn't go to college before the 1960s. They didn't get degrees until 1960s. How many of you have heard a variation of this claim? I don't want to call it a myth per se, but I do want to call it a claim. So I thought, wait, how is that possible if they're not getting degrees before the 1960s? And then I quickly remembered, wait a minute, Devon, didn't you just do a video debunking the myth of women not working outside of the home until the 1940s when I shared about my ancestor who became a doctor, a prominent doctor in the 1880s in Cincinnati? Well, she had to have gone to school somewhere, did she not? And I thought, okay, this sounds like another one of those claims that people have been propagating or I have been hearing that we need to touch on. So if you didn't watch that video about females working outside of the home before 1940, there is the link in the description box. Thank you for everyone who is joining in. Go ahead and tell me if you've had any female ancestors who went to college before the 1960s. I'd love to hear about it. And then I had asked, did anybody know about Deseret means honeybee? Yes, that is very, very true. Honeybee. I also think there was, if I remember correctly, something about hope or some symbology from Deseret as well as Ute. So it's interconnected. So they wound up getting the name Deseret honeybee industry and well, there's a political commentator who likes to talk about the Utah flags and bees, and we aren't going to talk about that here. I think it's silly. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that. I don't like to get into too many politics, but occasionally you just hear things and you're like, what? Okay. Anyway, so this brings me to the point of, have you found something that didn't fit the narrative you've always heard? And I want you to go ahead and share in the comments and in the chat. What are some things that you've found or heard passed on either through school, through the social media, through family lines that didn't fit once you started to do some research? And that's really what these kinds of topics are. Wait, that's not how I heard it. Oh, it sounds like that this was a claim that I need to investigate because I don't want to propagate falsehoods. All right, so let's get into a few more things. When people say, Devon, no one is saying women didn't go to school before the 1960s. Well, let me bring you to this website. It's a mom blog, and it's designed to recommend different products to children and others. And she has a series of claims here on her website that makes me stop and think, okay, I'm not insane for thinking I heard that somebody says women didn't go to college before the 1960s. So it says until relatively recently in history, women were not allowed to vote, participate in the Olympics, divorce a husband, wear pants, go shopping without a chaperone, own property if they were married, or join the military. And I thought, oh, okay. I mean, she provided her dates, and that was handy. And I want to go through it just a little smidge. Um, First of all, in Utah, women could vote before statehood, but the U.S. Congress said the territory had to take that right away in order for Utah to join the Union. So while, yes, it's true the 1920s is when women could start voting in federal elections, what about those folks in the territories that could vote, right? So not completely false. But this next claim, women couldn't participate in the Olympics until 1984. Are you freaking kidding me? Women first competed in the Olympic Games in 1900s in Paris, 4 years after the inaugural modern Olympics. So there were 22 women out of almost 1,000 athletes competing, and they competed in tennis, sailing, croquet. Croquet was an Olympic sport. How crazy is that? Um, and then equestrian and golf. So tennis, sailing, equestrian, and golf are still there. Croquet, I think, has gone the way of the dinosaurs. And so I thought, okay, I'm not crazy in thinking that I've heard people make various claims. One more that I want to challenge about the divorce not being allowed. So you couldn't divorce in South Carolina until 1949. The overwhelming majority of divorce petitions in colonial Connecticut were filed by women, primarily for adultery, desertion, or a combination of the two. And a good 77% of petitions were granted, and they could be higher given that they don't know the outcome of 21% of the cases. So for those of you who have done South Carolina research, is it true that women couldn't divorce until 1949? But for the rest of us, we need to be careful about this claim with regard to divorce, because back in 1776, there were locations that were granting divorces. Again, if a man ran off, which can easily have been done in the past because they didn't have the internet or the tracking situations of the day, what was a woman to do when she needs to provide for her family and she has no husband around, or in cases of abuse? So I do need to question some individuals when they make various claims. And we'll see later, she makes a claim about college education for women. So the claim that we're going to challenge today and get some clarity on is women didn't go to college before the 1960s. That's the way I remember hearing this claim again and again and again. Okay. But I think this is a claim that has been like playing the telephone game. So the truth is, women couldn't attend specific universities until 1960s. And that somehow changes or collapses into what I remember people saying, women didn't go to college until the 1960s. Do you know can you tell the difference? Women couldn't go to specific ones until the 1960s versus women didn't go to the college until the 1960s. So I feel like we have claims that have had what is called rhetorical compression, kind of like that telephone game that I hinted at. Rhetorical compression is a fancy way of saying to shorten a longer statement in hopes of conveying the same message, but it's not always the case. So, what is the truth of this claim about women didn't go to college before the 1960s? And before I tap into that, and I'm going to go ahead and look at some of your comments, so keep them coming. I'll pause for just a moment and actually ask you the question, why should genealogists care about whether women could go to college before the 1960s? Okay. Let's see. I'm going to pop on my glasses for just a smidge to help me read some of these comments. I had asked, what are some claims that people have made, and it turns out that it's not exactly true. I can't exactly remember how to phrase it, but this was in response. One of the things that challenged reality from Stacy was that people only live to be 40 or 50. Actually, I remember hear people saying, or in addition, I've heard people saying the average lifespan was 30. It falls into this, and that no one lived to be 90. And I actually came across another blog. I didn't include it because it wasn't part of this topic today. But yeah, they said nobody lives until 90. Yeah, we might have to challenge that one a little bit. Let's see. I've got some comments that I'm going to hold on to about women who went to college because I want to share some of your feedback as we get into things. Oh, and someone said, I have a divorce in my family before the Civil War. Tree climber, what state was that in? I'd like to know what state. And then, yeah, the one blogger didn't know her history. Very, very true. Okay. So in response to, I love when you guys are here and throwing in your comment. P. Smith says, why should genealogy care? Because it's family history. Amen. Amen. And then Stacy says, because we can miss information if we don't realize that our female ancestors could have attended college, and that could be why. I love that. That could be why they moved. Thank you. I should have thought about that, but I wasn't thinking that in context of this presentation. But gold star for you, Stacy. I want to give you a gold star. So true. And then before we continue on, remember Tree Climber said, I have divorce in my family before the Civil War in Ohio and Massachusetts. So we still haven't disputed the claim that South Carolina didn't grant divorces until 1949, but we are showing that there were divorces before the Civil War, which was 1863-ish time frame. And so, yeah, divorces could happen. There were valid reasons why. Was it absolutely common? No. But was it allowed? Sure. Okay, so why should genealogy cares? Our gold star student, Stacy, in the comment, did talk about some of the things that I mentioned or I thought about, and we'll touch on it even further. Share your other comments, just like P. Smith did. But genealogy depends on time and location. I know I've said this a million times on this channel. Genealogy depends on time and location. What is true in one part of the world may not be true for another in the same time period. And that's the case for all historical facts that impact our genealogy. You have to define the time and the location before you can talk specifics. So, are there places in the world where women are not currently allowed to attend college? I think so. I believe so. Does that mean that's the case today, right now? No, that is not true. In the past, let's go into it. So today I'm going to define my time and my location. The time, let's do the location first. The United States, and the time is we're going to see how early or late that females obtained advanced degrees. That means post high school, if you will, degrees. So, in order to do that, we need to hop into a little history lesson. If you like history, let me know by typing an H in the comments if you're watching live, or just say, I love history in the comment section if you're watching a replay. So, here's another claim. This is from the same website, that blog that I showed you earlier. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was an American suffrage that had a leading figure of the women's rights. That's great. Wonderful. It's hard to believe, but just over 200 years ago, women couldn't go to college. See, there is that claim women couldn't go to college. But now she said, just over 200 years ago. So her blog was written in 2024. Subtract 200 years and you get about 1824. If I've done the math, that's great. Thank you guys for participating in the chat. I'm loving it. So 1824, that's where we're going to see if her claim holds up. In the blog, the Synagogue, they also talk about Oberlin College in that second paragraph. I think, yeah. The second paragraph, Oberlin was the first to admit both women and men in 1833. However, it wasn't until the 1840s that Oberlin granted degrees to female graduates. Now, we're going to talk about what they were studying here in a minute, but 1833, we haven't debunked the 1824 that she was talking about, but we do have a timeline, a date in history where we're talking about whether they could go to college or not. And remember, we're talking about just the United States. If you are an international viewer and you know how early women could attend college in your part of the world, let me know. I don't want to ignore the education of women worldwide, but I have to narrow the focus in order to dispute certain claims. So there is it's actually supposed to be Wikipedia. They talk about in colonial America, the education of women. It said few girls attended formal schools, but most were able to get some education at home or in dame schools where they were taught reading and writing skills. By 1750, nearly 90% of England's women, almost all of the men, could read and write. There was no higher education for women. Okay, so we've got this is in the 1700s. This is colonial America with her, not her. This is the Wikipedia. We don't know who actually wrote it, but the collaborative authors have defined 1750. So one of the claims they said was that few girls attended formal schools and there was no higher education for women. Okay, sounds great. But history is about context. What was happening up until 1776 when the founding of the United States? So granted, there says 1750, but I'm going to bound it by 1776, colonial America. What else was happening? Well, there's a counterbalance to these claims, and that is few boys attended school at the same time, and few boys attended higher education. And so while no women attended higher education in colonial America, it wasn't common for boys either. So do you see, we cannot make claims without presenting the counterclaims when we're doing genealogy. Okay. So let's get a little more historical context about colonial America. First of all, in that time period, there were about 1 million people, 1,017,000 to 1,002,000. That's not a lot of people. They are still in the founding setting up of the area. And you need to be more settled and not living hand to mouth before higher education becomes something that's relevant or important. And another thing, just to throw it in there, perspective. In New York, there was only 2,500 residents. Okay. It's still a very, very rural area, even though these larger cities are starting to grow. A high percentage of the population is male. Why does that impact education? Well, if you have a lot more men than women and you're settling a land, they don't have a lot of time for education. They are really building, constructing, cultivating, and many of the early settlers weren't college educated themselves. It wasn't a priority yet. And most people lived in small towns or isolated communities, so college wasn't really an option because there wasn't a way to pull people together. Okay. I've got some great comments. I'm going to stop in a bit and reference those here in a minute. The next thing, and Tree Climber is tapping into it. I see your comment that just came in. This was about the extent of the colleges that were in the United States. Well, actually, this is colonial America. It's not even the United States yet. Harvard was founded in 1633. College of William and Mary, 1693, Yale, 1701, College of New Jersey, which is the precursor to Princeton, was 1746, and the Public Academy of Philadelphia, which I believe later became the University of Pennsylvania, it was about 1740, 1755. Notice in green what everybody is studying. Ministry. And at that time, most of the ministers were men. So, what does that lead us to conclude? Well, there wasn't necessarily a need for women to go to college at that time because they couldn't be female clergy. And few men were going to college either because they weren't going into the ministry. So now that we have context, properly framed our context, we can write about the education of the time period, can we not? So the point of going back and looking at context for claim is just because something is scarce doesn't mean it was exclusatory. And while, yes, women couldn't be in the clergy, so they didn't go to college, which were training ministers, it also just meant there was scarcity for everybody. So let's dive a little bit deeper. Let's go to the time period after the nation was founded and into what I'm going to call the Young Republic time period. You could call it antebellum. You can call it the expansion era. But I'm going to target in on the 1830s to 1880 time period. And notice what's different. The population is growing exponentially. It wasn't just 1 million people across 13 colonies. This is the Young Republic, so it's expanding to what we now call the Midwest, right? And we now have from 12 million in 1830 to 50 million in 1880. Not everybody is going to be farming and settling. They're going to be looking to develop more fields that may require further education than just ministry. So here's a timeline of the colleges that are being founded. Oberlin, founded in 1833, it offered female seminary and teacher training. Notice how the population is growing. The balance, I didn't put a slide on it, but the balance of men to other women and children, it's coming more into balance as you start to live less hand to mouth. Education becomes more important. So what do we need? We need more teachers and potentially women to assist in teaching the rising generation their religious education. So 1833, women are getting some kind of certifications. Not a bachelor's yet, not what we consider a master's, but at this time, the bachelor's degree was just considered to be a liberal arts degree. So we got to be careful there too. Mount Holyoke was founded in 1837 in Massachusetts. In the South, the Georgia Female College was established in 1839, and it was the first to award bachelor's degrees. Now, these bachelor degrees were liberal arts education. So all of the humanities and geography and thinking, rhetoric, logic, not thinking, logic, rhetoric, all that classical education. And then there were 11 women in that first class receiving their bachelor's degrees. And then medical colleges, I found this interesting. 1848, the New England Female Medical College, which happens to be in Boston, trained female physicians and midwives. Now, they didn't get the certification as a PhD, an MD yet. That came just a little bit later. And that was in Pennsylvania in 1850. That college was the first to give women medical degrees. There are a few more things to highlight. Mary Sharp College in Tennessee, another state that I consider to be in the South, was the first to award degrees to women in math and science. All right, so STEM fields of the past are giving these degrees instead of just a liberal arts education. I included the University of Deseret, and the reason why I included that because this was territorial United States. So these other locations are very much established, much more established than Deseret was, which was the precursor to Utah Territory, which became a state. But they valued education so much in the 1850s that they went ahead and started giving out degrees. And then there's another, I don't know how to say that. It looks like Bryn Mawr. I could be wrong. But that in 1885, they're now awarding PhDs. So could women go to college before 1960? The answer is yes. Did they? That's a different question. I want to stop for a moment and take a peek at some of the comments you guys have left. Some women that you have shared who have gone to college. I think now is a great time to share those. Okay. So, P. Smith said Violet Shatava went to business college from 1928 to 1930, graduated and worked 2 years, and then she married and never went back to work. You know what? I can't blame her. I went to college at Texas A&M University. I'm very proud of the degree in marketing with a minor in journalism that I obtained. I worked for 2 years until my husband graduated and our first child was born, and I haven't gone back. Now, this genealogy YouTube channel, it's just kind of a side fun thing for me to do as my kids have gotten more independent, but I haven't had to go back, and it's kind of cool. All right. Patsy Johnson said she had 2 aunts that graduated early in the early 1900s. Because we saw the list of where, if you could drop in where, even if you just get the state, that would be great. Kathy says, both of my grandmothers had college degrees and attended college in the early 1900s. Awesome. And she followed up and said, I attended Stetson's University, and it admitted women almost from its founding in 1883. Awesome. Now, I don't know where Stetson University is. So Kathy, can you tell me where that is? And I'll follow it up once I see the rest of these comments. Kathy also said, my great grandmother who lived in Georgia attended a girls' boarding school, and although she was a teen, got the equivalent of a college education studying philosophy, math, geology, and so forth. And that's really important. You notice she said the equivalent of a college education. We need to be careful when we're, excuse me, we need to be careful when we're talking about whether women were educated or not, because if they had the rigorous training, but they didn't get the certificate to say this is as rigorous as a male degree, it doesn't mean that our women weren't educated. So we can go ahead and say they didn't get a degree, but I want to be careful that it says they weren't educated. Tree Climber said, my grandmother and her sister went to college in the 1930s. Let's see. Oh, yes. And first female doctor was in 1847 in New York. Yes, very good, Tree Climber. That is very true. I didn't include her on one of the later slides, but I included somebody else because of the celebration that's happening this month. Penny says both of my grandmothers went to college very early in the 1900s. Let's see what are the follow-ups. I want to hear the story about Patsy Johnson Johnson's name. I do too. Viola, this is a comment, and I would love to have you guys have this discussion. Do you think that Violetta might have had to stop working during the Great Depression? That is a very good theory, and it's also why we should explore things. Oh, Penny, follow up. Maternal grandmother graduated in Dallas. Paternal grandmother went to Normal College in Kansas, both early 1900s. How cool is that? All right. J.D. Annie Inskeep. My 7th great grandfather went to Yale with his first cousin, Captain Nathan Hill. If it was before the revolution, women probably didn't go to college. I don't know if it was. And they cut off. So yes, women didn't necessarily go to college in the colonial time period because they weren't trained, as we showed, to the ministry. But by 1833, there was a female seminary. And so, see, I hear you know what? I might have bias coming into the word seminary. When I hear seminary, actually, I have 2 definitions of seminaries. I have the LDS definition, and if you know it, you can drop it in the comments. But really, when I hear about seminaries, like college-level seminaries, it's that training into the ministry. So most likely, yeah, women didn't go to those IVs, and we're going to come back to those IVs here in a minute and why they may be to blame for the myth that's circulating. All right, you finish it. My great grandmother was a midwife, but didn't attend college. 1990s called a baby catcher. Oh, the terms we have, but that's what they did. I mean, that's not all they did, but it's very description. Rise of normal schools in the early 1800s taught teachers. First teacher in Steuben, Indiana, was a female about 1825. So a normal school, that would be something we could all learn more about. What are normal schools, and are they equivalent to a college? So, while it's a little off topic of going to college, I think this is hilarious. And I'll tell you why in a minute. My Aunt Faye taught lower grades in a rural Kansas town when she was 16, barely out of high school herself. But what if she's such a learned individual that she was already helping the younger people? Why not hire her to assist in the schools? I think it's fantastic. All right. So let me go back to what I had prepared. Keep the comments going. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. That's why I like live streams. I like to hear you guys' comments in real time. Okay. So I think we have debunked that women didn't go to college before the 1960s. Okay. So now we need to dive into something of import. What kinds of women went to college before the 1960s? Because I feel like the women who started going to college after the 1960s are different than those who went before. So let's talk about the kinds of women, because this is relevant for genealogy and when we're writing stories. What kinds of women went to college in 1830s to 1880s? Well, first, They were typically middle class to elite women. Why? College was expensive. College is still expensive, but there are strategies for why for how to make it less expensive. And so, yeah, money was a restrictor when it came to who went to college and who didn't. Here's another thing. If a woman had a father who was professional, if they were ministers, lawyers, physicians, or merchants, or if they were prosperous farmers, then they probably would allow their daughters to go to college for a couple of reasons. I'd love to hear what you have in mind. My first reason was because it ties to the last one on the list. They were an educationally oriented household, so they had no problem with women getting an education. Additionally, college is a way to self-select women and men together. It's actually very true today. So, by having a daughter go and obtain an education, it puts her in a sphere of similarly minded individuals, which makes the marriage prospects even better. And as Stacy said, sometimes they went to college to find a spouse. And because they had some education, they could mingle. Very, very true. Very true. And then the other thing is many of the women were from cities or long settled towns. Generally, if you're on the frontier, college is not a priority because you're still just trying to establish the locations throughout the country, with the exception of apparently the Latter-day Saints because they wanted their women educated. Still do to this day. But when you're settling a town, you don't have the luxury to spend some time in books. You've got to build, you've got to cultivate the land, you've got to harvest, you've got to raise animals and so forth. And so as cities and long established towns started freeing up time for people to obtain higher education, that became something of interest. JD Annie, I don't want to put your comment on the screen because I'm not sure if your question is missing a word or not. So before I flash it on the screen, double check, make sure it's phrased correctly, and then I will respond to it there. Okay, so I wanted to share something because it is Black History Month. I want to share something that was also very interesting. And that was the first female, what do I say? Okay. Female co-eds were not always white in the 1830s to 1880s. Oberlin College admitted female students as early as the 1830s. I want to introduce you to Mary Jane Patterson, who became the first African American to receive a bachelor's degree in 1862. 1862, y'all. That's before the Civil War. Not bad. She, if I remember the story correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, she was a former slave. Then she was freed. She was educated. She was educated in the North, and she became a principal for the preparatory high school for colored youth in Washington, D.C. in 1871. So even in the midst of the 19th century, degrees were earned by women across racial lines. However, we can say in specific locations. So when I say genealogy is about time and location, we might also add institution. And so now I want to tackle the myth. How did it get started? what is potentially its origin? And why do people still believe it to this day? I blame the Ivies. While there were many colleges that educated women, there were many that were exclusively all male. Um, it doesn't play into the reason why people think 1960, but I know Texas A&M University didn't admit women. Women could attend casually, informally, but they weren't really admitted until the 1970s. And there's a reason. It's tied back to the Ivies. They in the 1960s, that's when Harvard, Yale, and Princeton finally admitted women into their institution. And what was interesting was many blogs and websites concur that the reason that women were admitted into the Ivies is because the Ivies were losing enrollment. Men were wanting to go to college with females among the student body. And so the numbers were dropping at the Ivies. So economic and social incentives seem to be the motivation for why the college began to allow women into their school. And so to me, I think the origin of the date of the 1960s of women couldn't go to college between the 1960s was the elite Ivy schools, and gives the illusion that the opportunities to be educated weren't there. So, what were the dangers in believing a claim that is false or it's rhetorical compression? So, depending on the time and location, women couldn't go to college, but that doesn't mean that in other locations at the same time that they didn't. The danger is that we'll be writing incorrect narratives. And the other danger is, as Stacy had mentioned earlier, we may be overlooking potential record sets. So, how are you going to find out if your ancestors attended college? Now, some of you happen to know. I got that comment in from a few of you, so thank you very much. How are you going to know if your female ancestor went to college? Well, first, home sources. As many of you have said, you know that your ancestor went to college. So tell me in the chat, how do you know, those of you who have shared your females and they went to college, how do you know that they went to college? Do you have paperwork? Do you have diaries? Do you have artifacts and memorabilia? What do you have that tells you? Or is it just family stories or personal interviews? Let me know. I want to know, how do you know? But home sources. So just as I mentioned, my grandmother graduated from high school. I thought the story was she dropped out. But according to the paperwork in the family files, she graduated high school in the mid 1930s. Yeah, because she was born 1920, so 16 years would be mid to late 1930s. We had her graduation certificate. My great grandmother, Clementine Comfort Zenstein, she graduated school in Canada, and then she went to a teacher's college while her husband, or her future husband, went to college in the United States. So there was a school certificate in a cousin's family archive, and that's how I knew. I didn't know that she went to college until I looked at those home sources. Let's see. I'm seeing, someone mentioned a newspaper article. Perfect. Yes, newspaper articles. You'll be surprised how many newspapers will identify the class graduates, the people who are graduating, the people who are attending classes, this, that, or the other. That is how I was able to track another ancestor, collateral ancestor who went to Boston Medical College. Her paper for her nursing ceremony, it was in the newspaper. So newspapers are great. Family letters and physical diplomas. Yes, love those. Um, I have one grandmother's college diploma and had my mother's yearbooks, which was another one. So you may have a physical yearbook in your possession, or believe it or not, a lot of yearbooks are on Ancestry, MyHeritage, Classmates.com, the Internet Archive. And some are hiding in Family Search, but they're not indexed and searchable. But yeah, yearbooks are great. I have online sources, and my sister has my MAT, Grandmother's Beautiful College certificate. And when you find out, you go look into the school and you can learn about the different types of colleges and normal schools. Ah, this is awesome. You found your great aunt's thesis in an online catalog for the University of Tennessee. So that taps into university special collections, university catalogs, alumni list, alumni magazines. You could also look at sorority historical information, because maybe they joined a sorority or a fraternity. Fraternity are usually males, but sometimes the term, my mom was saying that she was somehow tangentially related to a fraternity. And so it was the umbrella term, even though the women's group was a satellite, a branch, a subsidiary. I don't know what the right term was, but there's, lots of ways to learn. So first, look for clues, and then look at what is available through the university. Because otherwise, if you just think, oh, and Stacy had this hint, I think it was Stacy, about the movement, why she moved. You want to look for the clues, because what if she was in the West and went to the East to obtain her education and then came back? Well, the East is a very, very broad space, is it not? And you wouldn't necessarily want to search through everything each university has. So always try to look for clues before you dive into specific university collection. So I don't know if you guys are Ferris Bueller fans, but there is definitely a line that says life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. So how does that apply to genealogy? Well, genealogists often research pretty fast. If we don't stop and challenge our assumptions once in a while, we could miss the stories of our ancestors' lives, particularly women obtaining college education, no matter their ethnic background, in the United States before 1960. The woman on the left there, she is one of the first Native women to obtain an education. I mentioned the first Black women to get a degree from Oberlin College and then go on to be a principal in Washington, D.C. And the last one there is Elmira Young. She is special to me. She is a multiple great aunt who became a doctor after her husband died during the Civil War. So pretty amazing women in our family tree. And it behooves us not to take assumptions into our research, but instead go where the clues lead. Okay, I had a couple more comments that I wanted to highlight. I think it's important to fight revisionist history. Yes. And sometimes I think it's not intentional revision. Sometimes I think it is, again, a game of telephone tag, right? So the Ivies started admitting women to college in the 1960s. So women started getting college educated in 1960? No, they were educated before, but these specific places finally let them in. Let's see. And then this was related back to colonial area. Most colleges at that time were divinity schools in the United States. Very, very true. And so when you say women weren't allowed in the universities in a time period where it was mostly divinity school, Was it a location that valued education beyond training future ecclesiastical leaders? So we need to be careful how we frame things in our stories. Let's see. Let me put my glasses back on. Jan says, my mom took college classes around 1958. Where did she take them? Because I know college classes were allowed for females at A&M or before 1970. And so, but they couldn't graduate from A&M because it was basically an agricultural mechanical cadet school. And so since most of the cadets were males going into the military, both of my grandmas were youngest children in middle-class families. My paternal grandma taught in a one-room schoolhouse in rural Nebraska on my grandpa's property. Oh, that's awesome. I love it. Now, that doesn't say some people from lower and middle-class families in very rural areas didn't go to college. It was rare. And they often had a sponsor, or again, it might have been families that valued education, strongly valued education. Okay. So, yes, he did. This commenter rephrased it. If you weren't wealthy, how could you afford to go to college, especially before 1900, if you were just a regular person? Fantastic question. This is where philanthropic individuals would often sponsor students who showed promise and they wanted to help them better their lives. It could also be extended families. So maybe their parents were impoverished or lower class, didn't have the funds, but maybe an aunt or a grandparent or a cousin valued education and would then sponsor a male or a female to go to college. It also could be, let's say a woman goes into a rural area, they have doctor training, kind of like Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. Or there was a Hallmark one where Haley Duff, she wasn't the lead, she was just in it. I can't remember what the series was called, Love Calls the Heart or something like that, where it's about a female doctor, or at least two female doctors going to the West. They may come to know student or young people in the area who show interest in medicine, having worked for them. They come and like apprentice, and then they sponsor them to college or apply and get some type of grants. So there's lots of different ways people without a lot of money could go to college, but it was about networking and getting scholarships, kind of like you do today. All right. Well, thank you guys. I think that's most of the comments that we have today. I hope that this presentation challenges your assumptions that you're bringing to genealogy research, and that you can find the ladies in your family tree and capture their stories, but also put their lives in the context of the men around them too. If we're going to say that women didn't go to college in colonial era, we also have to admit that many of the men didn't go as well either, because few men went into ministry or ecclesiastical professions, which is what they were doing at the time. So always take a moment to check your bias to ensure that you're not revising history, as someone said, but you're doing it best to visit history, visit the past like a objective observer who just wants to document the past. If you do that, you may discover some pretty amazing stories, but also you are preserving an accurate history for future generations to decide what they're going to do to make the future better. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you in the next session. Bye now.